Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Great Plains Wildlife Reserve, where today we say hello to our first litter of coyote pups, another species like the raccoons that was very quick to get down to business and start reproducing, way before the habitat was fully complete. Today's habitat is going to be shared. I think this is the first one since the deer enclosure in the Highlands actually. This one will be split over 2 episodes though, beginning with the big, the bad, the bison. Okay, as I said last week, I kind of made life a bit more challenging by building the coyote habitat first, as now I have to work within a defined space. But let's see what we can do. First things first, I want to build up some sort of terrain to create something of a natural border. Not a barrier, as it should be more like a rolling hill than mountains. So we will also need some fencing, but this will just take a bit of the flatness out of the area and block off a little bit of the view from the outside of the zoo. We'll then have an area leaving a bit of space for the coyotes again, that I want to split with fat barriers. I'll explain what I mean by that in a bit. Now, the barn will be reminiscent of the donkey barn in the Highland Reserve. However, I have an idea for an entrance for the keepers with a bit of an observation deck that can be accessed from the raised area of terrain that we made last week. And finally, we'll need an offshoot from the main path for the guests so they don't clog up the zoo. And potentially some foliage to block off any sight lines from outside the zoo. Okay, now before I get into the names of our coyotes, I mentioned that this habitat would be split over 2 episodes, most of which will be in today's video. But it has been a bit of a busy week for me and I haven't had a lot of time, so I'm only introducing the bison today. Then next week I'll be adding some friends for them, fleshing out their spaces a little bit and adding any final touches and details. So today is just about getting the bison settled, but you know, there may still be some details to come. As always, if you're enjoying today's video, likes are always appreciated. For more like this, you can of course subscribe and head to the comments to leave your suggestions for today's beefy boy and girls. We have had some fantastic names suggested throughout this zoo so far, and I'm really happy that people are throwing their ideas into the ring. I have tried to include as many as possible, but don't worry if your idea doesn't get chosen. There are lots more animals coming very soon. I honestly have no idea what might be suggested for the bison, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing your names. The last thing before we jump into the build is the names for our coyotes. I think it was inevitable that we would be naming our first male after a Looney Tunes favourite. We had several suggestions for it, so our first name is going to be Wile E. Coyote. The second male is one of my own suggestions, just because we have 5 animals and most people said the same name, so we're sticking with the Looney Tunes theme. He shall be known as Calamity Coyote. Now, we've had a great selection of names submitted by Sean again, so the next 2 will be brought to us by him. Please welcome Tabaki and Bent Tail. And finally, a first time suggestion from Zeko Mapping, a partner to Wiley, Wiley-Ann Coyote. Thank you everyone who suggested a name. As I said, I love the ideas, so keep them flowing for today's bison. We have 1 male and 5 females, so there are lots to go around. I guess we should probably get into the actual video now then, eh? You'll have seen us started off building up the terrain into a hillside, closing off the front of the zoo. Not in a way that would be inaccessible, but just to cut off some of those free views. Now so far, all of our habitats have been contained units, which I suppose all habitats are in a way. But there's a difference between a building that can be moved and always be the same size and shape, and something like today where the central building is the barn, but the actual area can be whatever the space allows. I don't know if I'm making any sense in that explanation, but it makes clear sense in my head. The main feature of this habitat is the barn, and it is going to be massive. Maybe the biggest building that I've made so far on this channel. It is based on an image of a bison barn that I found after a 10-second browse on Google, so yeah, a lot of research went into this one. That being said, it is a fairly classic design, something that you see quite a lot. Maybe that you might actually see in the real world. In the real plains, even. If you watch the barn raising for the donkeys in the Highlands, you'll know that when I build something from scratch, I like to approach it, I think, in a similar way to how it might work in reality. I'll start with a heavy supporting frame to map out the bones of the building and make sure everything is even. This is usually where I feel the most optimistic about the outcome. It's a similar thing to drawing, or I guess any creative process. Those rough outlines have the most promise and possibility. It's only when you start adding the details that it will either come together or entirely fall apart, which is what I'm probably more used to. Today, I will then make sure that it's positioned correctly and add the pathing for the keepers so that I can work around it. Saves me making something I like and then having to tear it apart because the door and the paths won't fit, which is what I would usually do. I didn't say this was going to be the correct method, just my method. Recently I've been using plaster as a kind of rough template so that I can build around it and then keep the dimensions accurate. And what I found in doing that is that it's much easier to make walls when you have these panels to align to. Not only that, but I wasn't sure where exactly I wanted all the walls and the doors on the barn, so I used the black plaster paneling to fill in the areas I was considering having walls and then playing around with them to decide on the final layout. Typically with these style barns there'd be a door on the front and rear faces, but given the layout of the habitat and the orientation of the barn, I decided instead to go with side doors, which meant I didn't need to change my approach to the keeper access or my design for the split habitat, which are kind of essential to the foundation of what this habitat is. Today's animal, apart from being a formidable beast, is one of the clearest examples of both the dangers of human activity with a lack of information, and of the incredible achievements that people can make when they are informed. Before we greedy Europeans ventured west, the bison lived into the tens of millions throughout America. That's a lot, right? Nobody's gonna mind using a few for food and warm cloaks, right? Well, you might be right, but humanity has rarely been able to stop at a few, has it? By the end of the 19th century, overhunting had reduced the population to less than 1,000 individuals. Now I'm no vegetarian, but Jesus Christ, did you not bring anything else to eat? You've got to wonder if they stopped because they recognised what they were doing to the species, or they were just sick of beef. The other side to that coin, however, as I said, is a demonstration of the enormous good that people are capable of with more knowledge. Granted, it's been over 100 years, but these are large animals that don't breed that often. They've grown to a population of around 500,000 today. Yeah, a lot of those are livestock, but the species is now far from the near extinction it was facing, and one of the now symbols of America gets a chance to live on. Some extinctions are unavoidable, natural, part of the ebb and flow of the earth. Sentience gives us a unique ability to influence and understand these outcomes in a way that the natural order doesn't account for. We unsettled the balance of nature. And without getting too deep into the philosophy of it all, the only thing that can provide balance to us is us. That was an unexpected tangent, but like I say, it's been a busy week. My brain is fried and pretty much acting on its own, so I'm just going to go with it and hope for the best today. Something that I've had issues with in the past is roofing, or more specifically, I guess, what counts as hard shelter to the animals. I've used wooden planks in the past, in the exact same way as I've done here today, but it hasn't counted towards hard shelter. And I get it, there's gaps in the planks, water will get through without much issue. So why does it work today? I probably don't think it's a good idea for me to actually go pointing this one out, but I've even put them on upside down. The planks are supposed to overlap so the water can run down all the way to the bottom and run off. I've made it so that it can't escape and will just sit there and make damp, mouldy patches. Like an idiot. And yet, it works. And yes, I know I'm complaining about something working, but complaining is one of my pastimes. I'm very good at it. I can almost go pro. Within the barn, I've built an observation deck for the keepers so that they can check on the animals without disturbing them too much. Bison aren't like cows in the respect that the farmer could just walk among them. Bison are a lot stronger and more unpredictable, so for the sake of safety, we've set up a more hands-off approach. Now, the gates are not electric for this one, they are just sliding doors, so I haven't got an answer for that one yet, but that might be something I have to work on in next week's episode. The area at the back of the barn, up in the keeper area, I would love to have some hay storage, some work tools, other useful bits and bobs, maybe a jeep, not inside, outside obviously, but to get to the other habitats, as this is a little bit out of the way. All these little details that I need to sort out for next week. As you'll see, the barn itself is just functional at the moment. Finished, structurally, but unfurnished as it stands. This video is going to be a bit more like the previous zoo style. I haven't split it up into sections, mainly because it was built a little bit last minute, but also as a two-parter there's still a fair bit that needs to be done. I think that about 80% of the recording of this is the barn as well, so it wouldn't have been much in the final parts. Having said that, we do have a large outdoor space to work with. I've obviously had this section of the zoo blocked off for a while now, in anticipation of our new guests, and it is by far the largest habitat we have done here. I don't know if it's quite as large as the polar bear enclosure in Trondheim, but it is in that ballpark. The bison group I have need around 800 square meters to roam around in for peak happiness. That's without babies. I measured the final traversable area, not including the water or the inaccessible sections because of the fat barriers, at around 7,000 square meters. So plenty of room for activities, for offspring and for other species, which will have a higher area because they will be able to go beyond those fat barriers. And before I go into those, the fences around this habitat are the most minimal barriers I think I've ever made. These are literally just wooden poles with a wire mesh around them and some, sturdier wooden fencing around the rear. As much as these animals are strong and powerful and unpredictable, they can also run up to 30 miles an hour and jump over 6-foot fences. No matter what I make, a male bison at full tilt would smash through it with only a minor concussion at most. Or it could just leap over it like a cartoon character. If anything, an electrified wire might be best, but then I also wouldn't want to piss it off with shocks right next to where the guests are. Now, finally, we come to the fat barriers, and I can explain what they are. These are a series of short stumps or logs, with tyres around them to make them slightly more forgiving to something trying to force its way through. These are spaced out in a way that prevents larger animals like the bison from getting through, but allows smaller species to pass into other areas, hence fat barrier. I have these blocking off a section of the outdoor area and a part of the inside of the barn so that next week's animals have a bit of space to escape from the bison if they're getting bullied. We may also have some issues with baby bison getting through and maturing on the wrong side, but that should be an easy problem to solve when the time comes. I actually got the idea for these from ZSH Plays, one of his Jurassic World Evo episodes as it happens, to allow babies to get closer to the guests but hold the adults back at a safe distance. so it was a great opportunity to utilise it here. I don't know if they'll use it in the way that I planned, but it's available to them. I'm sure in real life they would use it, although in real life the bison could probably jump these barriers. The bison have, I think, about a 10% coverage limit for foliage, which usually would put them on my enemy list. However, this enclosure is so large and already covered in the long grass that 10% could be placed strategically to look like a lot more. Now, I have only used plants from the American grasslands, as you might expect, but it was a bit more limiting than I had hoped for, particularly when it comes to the trees. The only trees that were really available to me were the fig trees and the willows, which are not my favourites. Nevertheless, I used them to cover up some of the larger enrichment items, as usual. Thankfully, I wanted this to be a very open, not empty, but like a natural grassland. I did at one point start making exposed rock faces into the hillside, but decided one was enough, and against my natural instincts decided to focus on the foliage. That's not to say I didn't make use of the rocks. They are in full force up front in the flatter areas around the pond, but over the hills it's a bit more sparse. Naturally, I wanted to coat the entire area in grass, but as I mentioned, we only have 10%, so I had to be a little bit more strategic. I have tried to accept that the long grass that is part of the terrain paint will need to be enough for the majority of the distant portion, despite the render distance making it look bare, like an old Windows 95 desktop background from the guest path, and just focus on the near and middle distances. That's kind of all I have to say on the actual building of the enclosure for today. The last thing I really thought to mention was the size difference between the male and female bison. It is absurd. Take a look when they all run in to eat in these cinematics. Just check out the scale of our fella. And with that, I am out of brain power for words, so I will fade softly into the night as my bison home continues. Thank you all for watching. I think we just hit 75 subscribers, which is insane. I don't know what to do if we hit 100 early. I didn't really have a plan for that. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying the Great Plains Zoo so far. It's a bit toned down compared to Trondheim, but I really like how we've started out here. Lots more to do though. I hope you have a fantastic week, and I will see you again in the next one.